The metallic taste of blood filled Kai Voss's mouth as he dragged himself through the smoking wreckage of Outpost Helix, his tactical gears shredded and his left shoulder screaming where crystalline shrapnel had torn through muscle. The twin suns of Vaeleth blazed overhead, turning the prismatic dust beneath his boots into a furnace that reflected heat like broken mirrors, each grain sharp enough to cut exposed skin. Behind him, the skeletal remains of the evacuation shuttle still smoldered, its hull twisted into abstract art by Zephyrite plasma cannons that left the air tasting of copper and ozone. 47 hours. That's how long it had been since the surprise attack, since he'd watched his unit disappear in flashes of superheated gas, since the rescue bird had been shot down with him as the only survivor crawling from the wreckage. His water was gone, his rations a memory, and the emergency beacon on his chest broadcasted nothing but static punctuated by the dying screams of soldiers he'd never meet. The sound hit him first, a low moan that could have been wind through the wreckage, except there was no wind on Vaeleth. Only the crushing heat and the smell of burnt metal that clung to everything like a funeral shroud. That's when he saw her. Pinned beneath a collapsed communications array, the figure looked more like an exotic statue than a living being. Her skin was the deep blue of ocean depths, and her hair, what he could see of it beneath the debris, shimmered purple in the harsh light, almost iridescent where the suns caught it. Thera. One of the indigenous hunters from the northern territories. Kai's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm before stopping mid-draw. She was breathing. Barely. Her golden eyes tracked his movement with predatory awareness despite her trapped condition, pupils dilated with pain but still calculating threat assessment. Even dying, she was dangerous. Stupid, Kai muttered to himself, then questioned his sanity as he approached the trapped alien. Her armor was crafted from some kind of organic composite that seemed to shift color with her breathing, form-fitting and decorated with intricate patterns that spoke of artistry as much as protection. A pool of violet blood had congealed in the prismatic dust around her, and her breathing was shallow, labored, each exhale sending tiny sparkles into the air where her breath crystallized in the heat. The communications array was massive, easily 4 times his body weight, but Kai had learned long ago that physics was just another enemy to outmaneuver. He found a piece of twisted hull plating to use as a fulcrum, positioned it carefully, and threw his entire body weight against the improvised lever. The metallic groaning echoed across the wasteland like a death cry. Metal screamed against metal. Inch by agonizing inch, the array lifted, revealing more of the alien beneath. Her left leg was clearly broken, twisted at an angle that made Kai's stomach turn. Her eyes snapped fully open as the pressure released, golden, luminous, holding intelligence and pain in equal measure. She tried to speak, but only managed a harsh whisper that sounded like wind through broken stone. "Easy," Kai said, his voice hoarse from dehydration and the acrid air. "Don't try to move." She stared at him with those unnerving eyes, and he could practically see her mind working through the situation. Human. Enemy. Why hadn't he killed her? The logical thing would be to put a bullet through her skull and move on. Resources were precious, and she was nothing but a liability. Instead, with the array lifted enough, Kai dragged her clear of the wreckage. Her breathing was becoming more labored, and he could see infection already spreading around a deep gash on her thigh, angry red lines radiating outward like poison ivy. In this heat, with the contaminated air full of metallic particles that glittered like toxic snow, she had hours at most before sepsis claimed her. The alien, Naia, he would learn later, managed to prop herself up on one elbow. Her hand moved to the curved blade at her hip, and for a moment Kai thought she might try to gut him despite her condition. The weapon was unlike anything he'd seen, grown rather than forged. Its surface rippling with organic patterns that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. Instead, she drew the weapon and held it out to him, handle first. "Take it," she whispered, her voice like grinding stone mixed with music. If you survive this waste, you may need something that knows how to kill. Kai hefted the blade, testing its weight and balance. It was beautifully crafted, the biometal seeming to ripple with its own inner patterns that responded to his grip, actually warming under his touch. But after years of carrying wounded soldiers across hostile terrain, weapons had become secondary considerations. Too light, he said, dropping it at her feet. The blade landed with a sound like a struck bell. I don't carry blades. I carry people. Without another word, he began fashioning a makeshift sled from the scattered debris. Hull plating stripped from the shuttle's interior, still warm from the crash. Flexible conduit torn from destroyed equipment that sparked occasionally with residual energy. Webbing salvaged from tactical gear. Anything that might bear weight and slide across the crystalline surface without cutting through. Naia watched him work with a mixture of confusion and what might have been grudging respect. Her golden eyes tracked his every movement, cataloging his methods, perhaps judging his competence. When he finished, Kai lifted her as carefully as he could manage and settled her onto the improvised stretcher. She was lighter than expected but still solid, her alien physiology denser than human bone and muscle, yet somehow more graceful. Where? She asked as he took up the improvised harness, the straps already cutting into his shoulders. Station terminus, Kai replied, not looking back. If it's still standing. The first step sent fire through his injured shoulder, but he ignored it. Pain was just information, and right now, the information was telling him to keep moving. You think this is wasteland? Naia's voice carried bitter amusement as Kai dragged her across what felt like the 100th ridge of crystalline dust. The heat was beyond unbearable, each breath feeling like swallowing molten glass, even with the makeshift canopy he'd rigged to provide shade. What else would you call it? Kai grunted, sweat streaming down his face as he adjusted his grip on the harness. His uniform was already soaked through, the fabric chafing against raw skin. Home, she said simply, then added with venom that made the air around them seem to cool. Before your kind decided to turn it into glass. Kai said nothing, conserving energy for the brutal work of moving them both across the wasteland. But Naia wasn't finished. You don't speak to the stones, she observed. Don't hum the traveling songs that keep the dust spirits calm. Eat without thanking the land that feeds you. Her tone was accusatory, as if his mere existence was an insult to her people's ways. Sorry to disappoint, Kai muttered, tasting salt and grit. Your silence is loud, she continued. Like thunder before lightning. My people would have ended your noise by now just to hear the world breathe again. Kai was about to respond when his trained eye caught something wrong with the terrain ahead. Too smooth. Too perfectly level. The dust here didn't catch the light the same way. It had been disturbed, then carefully smoothed over. He dropped the harness and held up a hand for silence. Don't move, he whispered. Pressure mine? You were about to drag us both right over it. Naia fell silent, her golden eyes tracking the nearly invisible outline of the buried explosive. She had been so focused on needling him that she'd missed signs that should have been obvious to a hunter of her supposed skill. Embarrassment flickered across her features before being replaced by something that might have been respect. Kai carefully guided the sled around the mine, taking a wide path that added another hour to their journey but kept them breathing. The device was clearly of human manufacture, one of their own defensive measures, probably forgotten in the chaos of evacuation. As they continued, the sky began to fill with a new sound, the distinctive whine of surveillance craft. Their engines creating harmonics that seemed to resonate in Kai's bones. Kai squinted upward and cursed under his breath. 3 airborne units, too high to identify faction but close enough to be marking them. Their shadows passed overhead like dark omens. Rogue elements detected, came the tinny announcement from the nearest craft. Classification, enemy combatants. Termination authorized. Seems like your people and mine agree on something, Kai said grimly, already calculating escape routes. Agreement is death, Naia replied, and for the first time since he'd found her, she didn't sound like she was mocking him. The first patrol found them at sunset when the twin suns cast long shadows that offered precious little cover but turned the crystalline dust into a field of fire, each grain blazing like a tiny star. 12 soldiers in mixed armor, some human, some alien, a joint task force that had apparently decided Kai and Naia represented enough of a threat to warrant elimination. Kai counted them methodically as they approached across the open ground, their formation loose but professional. He recognized the insignia, Crimson Battalion, mercenaries who worked for whoever paid best. 12 against one half-dead human and an injured alien. The odds would have been laughable if they weren't so thoroughly in favor of his imminent death. Stay down, he told Naia, then began moving. Kai had learned long ago that conventional tactics were for people who had conventional resources. When you were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options, you had to think like the terrain itself, patient, brutal, and absolutely merciless. The abandoned refueling station had been bombed to hell, but the underground storage tanks were still intact. More importantly, the feeder lines were still pressurized with volatile fuel compounds that turned the air shimmer with their fumes. Kai spent precious minutes rigging thermal bait from his emergency flares, positioning them to draw the patrol into a kill zone centered on the station. He watched through his scope as the lead soldier raised his hand, signaling the others to spread out. Professional. Careful. It wouldn't be enough. When the first soldier stepped onto the rigged section of ground, Kai triggered the trap from 200 meters away. The explosion wasn't large, fuel vapor igniting in a controlled burn rather than a detonation, but it was hot enough to cook anything within 30 meters and bright enough to blind anyone looking directly at it. The screams carried across the wasteland like the cries of dying birds. The survivors, those not caught in the initial blast, stumbled around in confusion and pain, their formation shattered. Kai picked them off one by one with his sidearm, each shot precise and economical. No wasted ammunition. No unnecessary risks. Just professional execution delivered with the cold efficiency of a machine. When the gunfire stopped, 11 bodies lay scattered around the burning station. The 12th, a young human private who couldn't have been more than 19, was crawling away through the dust, leaving a trail of blood that glittered in the firelight. Kai walked over and knelt beside him. The kid was gut-shot, maybe minutes from bleeding out, his eyes wide with pain and terror. Blood frothed at the corners of his mouth. "Please," the private whispered, his voice barely audible over the crackling flames. "I was just following orders. I got a sister back home." "I know," Kai said quietly, then put a bullet through the kid's brain. The sound echoed across the wasteland like a final prayer. When he returned to where he'd left Naia, she was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not fear exactly, but a new kind of wariness mixed with something that might have been understanding. 12, she said. It wasn't a question. 12, Kai confirmed, checking his ammunition count. Still dangerously low. "You're not just a soldier," Naia said slowly. "You're something else. Something that kills without anger, without joy. Like winter kills, inevitably." Kai didn't answer. He was already breaking down his position, preparing to move again before more patrols arrived. But he noticed that Naia had quietly activated her personal comm unit while he was fighting, its tiny screen glowing with incoming data streams. She was tracking something. Or someone. The next day brought new horrors. Naia's infection had spread, angry red lines radiating out from the original wound and tracking up her leg like the branches of a poisonous tree. Her fever was climbing, and she drifted in and out of delirium as Kai dragged her across increasingly barren terrain that reflected the heat in shimmering waves. They had been traveling for 6 hours when her body began to convulse. Kai immediately stopped and deployed his emergency medical kit, field dressings, a few stims, and some basic antibiotics that might or might not work on alien physiology. The wound needed to be cleaned properly, but water was their most precious resource. Kai stared at his remaining supplies, maybe 8 hours of hydration left, then at Naia's deteriorating condition. Her skin had taken on a grayish tinge that couldn't be healthy in any species. He rigged a condensation trap using reflective material from his pack and their shared body heat. It took 2 hours of precious daylight, but eventually he'd collected enough moisture to irrigate the wound properly. The clear liquid looked like liquid starlight in the alien sun. The sound Naia made when the clean water hit infected tissue was somewhere between a scream and a prayer, a keening cry that seemed to resonate with the crystalline dust around them. "Why?" she asked when the immediate agony had passed. Her voice was weaker now, thready with fever. "Why what? Why carry me? I'm nothing to you. Less than nothing. I'm the enemy." Her golden eyes were bright with fever and confusion. Kai continued working on her wound, applying antibiotic paste with steady hands despite his exhaustion. "Because I once left someone. I won't do that again." "Who?" "My daughter." The words came out flat, matter-of-fact, but they hit the air like dropped stones. "Transport went down in contested airspace. I had to choose between going after her or completing the mission. I chose the mission." Naia studied his profile in the fading light, noting the way his jaw tightened with the admission. "Did you complete it?" "Yeah. Saved 300 civilians. Got a medal." Kai's voice was bitter now, edged with self-loathing. She was 8 years old. Had this laugh that sounded like wind chimes. Used to collect smooth stones and pretend they were dragon eggs. They traveled in silence after that, the only sounds the whisper of the sled across dust and Naia's labored breathing. But something had changed between them, a crack in the wall of mutual hostility that had defined their relationship since the moment he'd pulled her from the wreckage. As the day wore on and the heat became unbearable, Kai began to stumble. Exhaustion, dehydration, and the emotional weight of his confession combined to make his vision blur and his steps falter. The harness felt like it was cutting him in half, and his injured shoulder sent spikes of pain down his arm with every step. When he finally collapsed beside a cluster of twisted metal that might once have been a transport, his mind slipped away from the burning wasteland and into memory. He was back on Transport 77 Alpha, the evacuation ship that had taken fire over the Kepler Nebula. Smoke filled the passenger compartment, and the deck lurched beneath his feet as the pilot fought to maintain altitude. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and over the screaming of damaged engines, he could hear children crying. "Daddy!" Emma's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. She was strapped into an emergency seat near the starboard bulkhead, her small hands reaching for him as debris rained from the ceiling. "Daddy, help me!" Kai tried to move toward her, but his commanding officer's hand clamped down on his shoulder. "Voss, we need you at the weapons console. Now. My daughter is one child. We have 300 souls on this ship. Move!" The tactical display showed enemy fighters closing fast, their weapons already charging for another attack run. The transport's defensive systems were failing, and without immediate action, everyone aboard would die. Including Emma? Kai looked back at his daughter one more time. She had stopped crying, her 8-year-old face set with a determination that broke his heart. Her favorite stuffed rabbit was clutched in her arms, a threadbare thing she named Mr. Hopscotch. "Go, Daddy," she whispered, though he couldn't possibly have heard her over the noise. "Go save everyone." He went. He manned the weapons console and coordinated the defense that kept Transport 77 Alpha in the air long enough to reach the evacuation zone. 300 people lived because Kai Voss chose duty over love, mission over family. But when the ship finally landed and he turned to find Emma, her seat was empty. A piece of hull plating, torn loose during the attack, had crushed the starboard passenger section. The medics found her body still strapped in, her small hand reaching toward where her father should have been. Mr. Hopscotch was still in her arms, soaked with blood that would never wash out. Now, in the fevered landscape of memory and regret, Emma stood before him again. Not the broken child he'd found in the wreckage, but the daughter he remembered, bright eyes, gap-toothed smile, hair and pigtails that never quite stayed neat. "You left me, Daddy," she said, but there was no accusation in her voice. Only the infinite sadness of a child who understood too much. "I had to save everyone else." "I know. That's what heroes do." She stepped closer, and Kai could smell her favorite strawberry shampoo, could see the constellation of freckles across her nose that she'd inherited from her mother. "But now you're doing it again." "What do you mean?" Emma nodded toward where Naia lay unconscious on the makeshift sled, her blue skin pale with fever. "You're carrying her like you should have carried me." "It's not the same." "It is the same." Emma's voice was gentle but firm. "You left me to save everyone else. But this time, you're saving her too. You're not leaving anyone behind." Kai felt tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face, creating clean lines in the dust. "I tried to come back for you. After the mission was over, I tried." "I know, Daddy. And I forgive you. But you have to forgive yourself too." She reached out as if to touch his face, her small hand stopping just short of contact. "Promise me something. Anything. Don't leave her like you left me. Don't choose the mission over the person right in front of you. Not this time." The fever dream began to fade, Emma's image wavering like heat shimmer. "I love you, Daddy. But you have to love the living too." Kai jerked awake to find Naia shaking him gently, her golden eyes filled with concern despite her own deteriorating condition. "You were dreaming," she said. "Calling someone's name." Kai wiped his face with a shaking hand, tasting salt and sand. "My daughter. Emma. The one you left behind? The one I'm never leaving behind again." He struggled to his feet, shouldering the sled's harness with renewed determination despite the pain screaming through his shoulder. "Come on. We have ground to cover." That night, as Kai dozed fitfully beside their tiny shelter, a lean-to constructed from shuttle wreckage that barely kept out the wind, Naia's comm unit chirped softly with an incoming transmission. She listened with growing amazement and horror as a familiar voice whispered across the static. "Anyone receiving this, station terminus is still operational. Repeat, we have 30 civilians in need of immediate evacuation. This is Naia Thera requesting emergency assistance." Her sister. Alive. Inside the very station Kai was trying to reach. The sound of Vera's voice transported Naia instantly back through the years to when they were barely more than children, playing at being hunters in the crystal caves of their home world. She could see it all again with painful clarity, the day everything changed between them. They had been tracking a wounded human soldier through the maze of tunnels beneath the sacred peaks. Vera was 17, Naia 15, both desperate to prove themselves worthy of full clan status. The human had been separated from his unit during a raid, injured and disoriented. Easy prey for two skilled huntresses. "There," Vera had whispered, pointing to where the soldier huddled in an alcove, pressing a field dressing to a bleeding shoulder wound. "One clean thrust through the heart. Honor to the clan." But as they crept closer, they heard something that made them both freeze. The soldier was whispering into a comm unit, his voice breaking with emotion. "Sarah, baby, if you can hear this, Daddy's going to try to come home. I love you so much, little star. Take care of Mommy for me." A father. Just like their own father had been before the war took him, gentle hands that taught them to carve stone, a voice that sang them to sleep with ancient lullabies. Naia raised her blade, ready to complete the kill, but Vera's hand caught her wrist. Wait! What are you doing? He has a daughter. He's the enemy. He's a father. Vera's golden eyes were bright with unshed tears. Listen to him, Naia. He sounds just like Papa did when he used to tuck us in. The soldier continued his desperate message, unaware he was being watched. He spoke of bedtime stories, of a little girl's laughter, of promises he might never be able to keep. And something inside Vera, something that people would have called weakness, made her lower her weapon. We let him go, she whispered. Vera, no. The clan codes. The clan codes say we kill enemies. They don't say we slaughter fathers. Naia felt the weight of generations pressing down on her, their traditions, their honor, everything they had been raised to believe. But she also felt the tremor in her sister's voice, saw the tears tracking down blue cheeks, and knew that this moment would define them both. If anyone asks, Naia said finally, we never found him. The tunnels were empty. They had guided the soldier to a maintenance exit that led away from clan territory, given him water and basic directions to reach the human forward posts. Vera even provided medical supplies from her own kit. As they watched him disappear into the wasteland, limping but alive, she had turned to Naia with gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you, sister, for understanding. But Naia hadn't understood. Not really. She had simply chosen loyalty to Vera over loyalty to the clan, and the weight of that choice had haunted her ever since. Because 6 months later, when that same human soldier returned with a full company and razed 3 clan settlements to ash, she learned the true cost of mercy. 47 of their people died in those raids, elders, children, warriors who had trusted that their enemies would never find the hidden paths through the crystal caves. But someone had given them maps, shown them the secret ways, betrayed everything sacred for the sake of misplaced compassion. Vera never learned about the raids, never knew that her moment of kindness had doomed their kinsmen. Naia made sure of that, burying the truth beneath layers of silence and carefully maintained ignorance. But she carried the knowledge like poison in her veins, a constant reminder that mercy toward enemies was just another word for murder of your own. The calm transmission ended, leaving only static and the sound of Naia's labored breathing. Vera was alive, still saving people who should be left to die, still believing that compassion was strength rather than the deadliest weakness of all. And now Naia would have to face her again, blade in hand, with the weight of 47 ghosts demanding justice. By the 4th day, Naia was barely conscious. The infection had spread despite Kai's treatment, and her body was shutting down system by system. She collapsed completely around midday, her dead weight making the sled impossible to pull across the shifting dust. Kai stared at her motionless form, then at the kilometers of wasteland still stretching ahead of them. Every tactical instinct he possessed screamed at him to abandon her. She was slowing him down, consuming resources he couldn't spare, and would probably die anyway despite his efforts. Instead, he began breaking down their equipment. Kai cannibalized everything he could, belt webbing, pack straps, even strips torn from his own uniform. He lashed it all together into a proper harness that distributed Naia's weight across his shoulders and chest rather than relying on arm strength alone. It took him 3 hours to get the engineering right, precious time when they should have been moving, but when he was finished, he could pull twice the weight with half the effort. The ruined relay station appeared through the heat haze like a mirage, its twisted antenna array still reaching toward the sky despite the obvious damage. Kai dragged Naia into the shade of the collapsed communications dome, and finally allowed himself to rest. While he dozed, Naia's comm unit activated automatically, scanning available frequencies for any sign of friendly contact. What it found instead was an emergency channel broadcasting from station terminus, a signal that included biometric data on all 30 civilians currently sheltering inside. Naia's eyes snapped open as she recognized the genetic markers. Her sister was there, just as the voice transmission had indicated. But the tactical data accompanying the broadcast told a more complicated story. Naia Thera had been branded a traitor by the clan councils, stripped of honor and marked for execution. Anyone who aided her would share that fate. The mission parameters were clear: infiltrate the station, execute the traitor, eliminate any witnesses who might compromise the operation. It was why Naia had been in that transport when it crashed, why she'd been traveling alone toward the coordinates Kai was now struggling to reach. She stared at her curved blade, still lying where Kai had dropped it days ago. Too light, he'd said. But light enough to slide between ribs, to find the gap in armor plating, to end a life with a single precise thrust. Kai stirred in his sleep, muttering something that might have been his daughter's name. Even unconscious, he carried that weight, the guilt, the regret, the desperate need to balance scales that could never truly be balanced. When he woke, Naia was staring at him with those unsettling golden eyes. "My mission," she said quietly. "You want to know what it is?" Kai sat up instantly, alert despite his exhaustion. "Tell me." "Station Terminus. 30 civilians." She paused, watching his reaction. "One of them is my sister. She's been branded a traitor by our people. They sent me to kill her. And now?" Naia's hand drifted toward her blade, then stopped. "I don't know." The next morning brought fresh hell in the form of pursuit. Kai spotted the dust clouds first, multiple vehicles approaching from 2 different directions, moving fast across the hardpan. Through his scope, he could make out Crimson Battalion mercenaries in the lead group and clan war riders flanking from the east. "Looks like the mercs and the clan aren't working together anymore," Kai muttered, noting how the 2 forces were positioning to intercept each other as much as their targets. "Whatever temporary alliance they had is over." "How many?" Naia asked. She was stronger today, the fever finally breaking, but still far from combat ready. "Too many," Kai replied, already calculating angles and distances. "But at least they're more interested in fighting each other than coordinating against us." The terrain here was more broken, offering better cover but also more ways for enemies to approach unseen. The first group, 6 Crimson Mercs in a fast attack vehicle, crested the ridge at full speed, probably expecting to find easy targets in the open. Instead, they found a carefully prepared kill zone. Kai had spent the early morning hours positioning reflective debris to create false heat signatures, drawing the vehicle directly into an old minefield that the clan forces had missed in their earlier sweeps. The explosion flipped the vehicle end over end, scattering bodies and burning fuel across 100 meters of sand. The clan war riders, seeing the destruction, immediately shifted their approach vector to avoid the same trap. That's when Kai triggered his second surprise. A chain reaction of fuel vapor ignition that caught 3 of the 4 remaining riders in overlapping fireballs that lit up the morning sky. The 4th managed to pull clear, but its pilot was flying blind through smoke and debris. Kai put 2 rifle rounds through its intake manifold and watched it spiral into the ground with a sound like dying thunder. In the sudden silence that followed, he became aware that Naia was watching him with that same unreadable expression from the day before. 16, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. 16, Kai confirmed. My people have a saying, Naia continued, that death follows some warriors like dust follows the wind. You are that kind of warrior. Kai reloaded his rifle methodically, not meeting her eyes. Your people have a lot of sayings. This one is true. She paused, then added something that sounded almost like admiration. I'm beginning to understand why your kind has survived so long in this galaxy. But even as she spoke, Naia's comm unit was tracking additional signals. More patrols. More hunters. All converging on their location. Whatever Kai had done to survive this long, it had also painted a target on both their backs that was growing larger by the hour. They would reach the station by tomorrow, if they lived that long. And when they did, Naia would have to choose between the mission that had brought her here and the man who had carried her across hell to get there. She still hadn't decided which choice she could live with. Station Terminus rose from the wasteland like a metallic tumor, its armored bulk scarred by years of bombardment, but still intact. Kai felt a surge of relief at seeing their destination finally within reach, followed immediately by tactical anxiety, as he noted the defensive positions and sensor arrays still active around the perimeter. Motion detected, came the automated challenge as they approached the main access tunnel. Identify yourselves or face immediate termination. Kai Voss, Human Defense Corps, he called out, hands visible and away from weapons. I'm here for the evacuation. A moment of silence, then the heavy blast doors ground open to reveal the station's interior. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh red shadows, and the air smelled of recycled atmosphere and fear. 30 civilians, mostly non-combatants, huddled in small groups throughout the main chamber. Human and alien families, their faces marked by days of terror and uncertainty. Children clung to parents who had no answers for their whispered questions. And standing at the center of it all was Naia Thera. She was taller than Naia, her blue skin marked with the intricate scarification that denoted high rank within the clan hierarchy. But those markings had been defaced, burned over with brands that marked her as traitor, exile, unclean. When she saw Naia being helped through the entrance, her golden eyes widened with emotions too complex to name. Sister, Vera said, her voice steady despite everything. You came. I came, Naia replied, her hand resting on her blade's hilt. Kai positioned himself slightly between the two aliens, his tactical instincts screaming warnings even though he didn't fully understand the dynamics at play. The other civilians sensed the tension as well, drawing back to give the three of them space in the center of the chamber. You came to kill me, Vera said. It wasn't an accusation, just a simple statement of fact. Naia's grip on her weapon tightened. I came to erase shame. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of separation and the weight of clan law. The other civilians had drawn back, sensing the danger that crackled in the air between the two sisters. Whose shame? Vera asked gently. Mine for what I've done, or yours for what you believe you must do? You know whose shame. Naia's voice was tight with controlled emotion. You broke the codes. You saved enemies while our people died. I saved lives. Human lives. The words came out like a snarl. While our kinsmen burned. Vera nodded slowly, accepting the accusation without flinching. Yes. I saved human lives. Just as I once saved yours. Naia's blade trembled in her grip. What? You don't remember, do you? The ice storm on Keth Mara when we were children. You fell through the frozen lake, and the current carried you under the shelf ice. I dove in after you, even though Mother had forbidden us to go near the water that day. That's different. Is it? You were drowning, sister. My little sister, who I loved more than honor, more than duty, more than the approval of the clan elders. I carried you 1/2 kilometer through a blizzard to reach the healing houses. Your lips were blue, your heart barely beating, but I didn't let go. Naia's golden eyes were bright with unshed tears. That was family. Blood protects blood. These humans are someone else's family. Vera's voice was steady, but there was steel beneath the gentleness. Someone else's children, parents, sisters. When I saw that first human refugee camp, saw the children shivering in makeshift shelters while their parents searched for food. She paused, studying Naia's face. I remembered carrying you through the storm. And I couldn't walk away. You betrayed everything we were taught. I became everything you taught me. Vera stepped closer, ignoring the blade pointed at her heart. Do you think I learned compassion from the clan elders? From their codes of honor and blood debt? No, sister. I learned it from you. From me? Naia's voice cracked. From watching you tend to my wounds when training got too rough. From the way you used to sneak food to the servant children when mother wasn't looking. From the lullabies you sang when I had nightmares about father's death. Vera's eyes were soft with memory. You were never as hard as you pretended to be, Naia. Even then. Stop. The word came out as a whisper. Why did you really come here? Vera asked. To kill me, or to understand why I chose to save strangers the same way you once saved me? Naia raised her blade, its point now inches from Vera's throat. The weapon seemed to pulse with her heartbeat, its biometal surface reflecting the emergency lighting in hypnotic patterns. Why did you help them? Answer me that. Why did you help the humans? Vera smiled, the expression sad but genuine. Because I saw someone carry someone else through a desert long before you did. The words hit Naia like a physical blow. What? A human soldier, wounded and alone, carrying his dying comrade across the wastelands of Zirian Prime. I was hunting them both, following orders to execute any survivors of the crashed transport. But when I caught up to them, I saw something that changed everything. Vera's voice grew distant with memory. The wounded one could barely walk, but he refused to leave his friend. Dragged him for days through terrain that would have killed a healthy warrior. And when his friend finally died, he still carried the body, because he'd promised to bring him home. Naia's blade began to shake. That's not what we were taught about humans. No. It isn't. Just like what you did for me in that storm wasn't what we were taught about clan honor. Sometimes, sister, the truest strength isn't in following orders. It's in choosing who we carry. The station fell silent except for the hum of life support systems and the distant sound of approaching death. Naia stared at her sister, seeing not the traitor she'd come to execute but the child who had once followed her everywhere, who had learned compassion by watching it in action. The blade, Vera said quietly, echoing words from long ago. It's too light to carry the weight of what they've asked you to do. Then what should I carry instead? Naia whispered. Vera looked past her to where Kai stood ready to sacrifice himself for strangers, then back to her sister's tormented face. The same thing he carries. The same thing I carry. The weight of choosing love over law, mercy over tradition, the person in front of you over the orders that brought you here. Kai stepped between them then, his presence a reminder of everything they'd both learned about the weight of carrying others. Then start with me, he said quietly. The only sound was breathing, hers, his, and the silence that came before breaking a bloodline. Naia's blade trembled in her grip, the weight of duty and blood loyalty warring with something newer and more uncertain. Vera watched her sister's internal struggle with sad understanding. The blade, she said quietly. Too light to carry the weight of what they've asked you to do. Naia's golden eyes snapped to Kai, remembering his words from that first day. Too light. I don't carry blades. I carry people. She stared at the weapon in her hand, beautiful, deadly, perfectly balanced for killing. Then she looked at Kai, scarred and exhausted from carrying her across hundreds of kilometers of hell simply because he couldn't bear to leave someone behind. The blade clattered to the floor, its biometal surface going dark as it lost contact with her life force. You can't even hold a weapon, Naia whispered, but the words carried no accusation now, only a kind of wonder. Kai knelt and picked up the fallen blade, then placed it gently at her feet. The weapon began to glow softly again, responding to his touch with alien curiosity. Yours was too light. I carried what mattered. That's when the sirens began to wail. Orbital strike incoming, the station's AI announced with mechanical calm. Estimated time to impact 18 minutes. Recommend immediate evacuation. The civilians erupted into panicked movement, but Kai held up a hand for silence. In the sudden quiet, he could hear the distant whine of targeting systems locking onto their position. Where's your transport? He asked Vera. Docking Bay 7, she replied. But it only seats 25. Kai did the math instantly. 30 civilians plus the 3 of them. Not enough seats for everyone. Naia understood immediately. You'll stay. Kai was already moving toward the control console, his tactical mind shifting into sacrifice mode. If I walk away now, I carry that forever. Even if no one remembers. Someone will. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the chaos around them. Kai paused, his hands hovering over the defensive grid controls. For a moment, his facade cracked, and she could see the weight he'd been carrying, not just her across the desert, but the ghosts of everyone he'd failed to save. You will, he said, meeting her golden eyes. The words hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Then Kai turned back to the controls, and the moment was gone. Get them loaded, he ordered, beginning to activate the station's emergency systems. I'll delay the strike, buy you time to clear orbit. How? Naia demanded. Kai didn't answer. He was already accessing the station's defensive grid, rerouting power to the shield generators and preparing to broadcast a wide-spectrum interference pattern that might confuse the targeting systems for a few precious minutes. It would work, probably long enough for the transport to escape, but maintaining the interference would require manual control from inside the station. And the orbital bombardment would sterilize everything within 50 kilometers. Kai, Naia said, understanding flooding her voice. No. Get on the ship, he replied without looking up from the control console. That's an order. But Naia was no longer taking orders from anyone. She grabbed her blade from where it had fallen and pressed it into Kai's hands. The weapon blazed with sudden light as it made contact with his skin. Too light for you, she said. But maybe heavy enough for what comes next. She turned to her sister, golden eyes bright with unshed tears. Take them home, Vera. All of them. Human and alien alike. The last transport lifted off from station terminus 12 minutes before the orbital strike hit. Kai watched it disappear into the burning sky through the station's reinforced viewports, then settled himself at the control station to wait for the end. The interference pattern held for exactly as long as it needed to. The transport made it to minimum safe distance just as Kai's jury-rigged systems finally overloaded and died. He had maybe 30 seconds before the first kinetic impactor turned everything within sight into molten glass. Kai closed his eyes and thought about his daughter. About Emma's laugh that sounded like wind chimes. About promises he'd broken and the ones he'd finally kept. 1 week later, a lone figure picked her way through the crater that had once been station terminus. The orbital bombardment had turned dust to glass and metal to slag, but at the very center, protected by layers of emergency shielding that had somehow held against impossible odds, a single chamber remained intact. Naia found Kai unconscious but breathing, his vital signs so weak they barely registered on her scanner. Burns covered most of his body, and his left arm was clearly broken, but he was alive. Impossibly, incredibly alive. She looked at the makeshift sled she'd spent 2 days building, strips of salvaged metal, webbing torn from her own gear, everything lashed together with the same careful engineering Kai had used to carry her across the wasteland. She was no tactician, no master of battlefield logistics, but she'd learned from the best. Too stubborn to die, she murmured as she carefully lifted Kai onto the sled. Just like someone else I know. The journey back to civilization took 4 days. Naia pulled Kai across kilometers of glass and ash, stopping frequently to check his condition and administer what medical aid she could manage. She rationed their water with the same ruthless efficiency he'd shown, calculated their route with the same tactical precision, and never once considered abandoning her burden, even when logic suggested it was hopeless. On the 3rd day, Kai briefly regained consciousness. His eyes were unfocused, pupils dilated from pain medication, but he managed to speak. The civilians? Safe, Naia replied. All of them. My sisters established a refugee camp in neutral space. Humans and aliens working together, if you can believe that. Kai managed something that might have been a smile. Your blade, he whispered. Still too light. Naia looked down at the weapon hanging from her belt, then at the sled harness cutting into her shoulders. Learning to carry different things now, she said. When they finally reached the refugee camp, Vera was waiting at the perimeter with medical teams and a dozen questions. But she took one look at her sister, scarred, exhausted, but somehow more solid than before, and simply nodded. Welcome home, Vera said. Not home yet, Naia replied, glancing back at Kai as the medics loaded him onto a proper stretcher. But maybe getting there. 3 days later, as Kai continued his recovery in the medical bay, Vera found Naia sitting alone at the camp's perimeter, staring out at the alien landscape that had nearly killed them all. The older sister settled beside her, noting how Naia's hand no longer rested automatically on her blade's hilt. There's something you need to know, Vera said quietly, about what we've started here. Naia turned to look at her. What do you mean? The clan councils have issued death warrants for both of us. Not just execution, complete erasure. Our names will be stripped from the genealogy stones, our bloodline marked as corrupted. Vera's voice was matter-of-fact, but Naia could hear the weight beneath the words. They're sending hunter packs. Professional killers who won't be swayed by family bonds or old loyalties. How many? 3 packs confirmed. Maybe more. Vera paused, watching a group of human and alien children playing together in the camp's central courtyard. But that's not the part that scares them. What do you mean? Word is spreading about what happened at the station. About the human who carried an alien across the desert. About the huntress who chose mercy over honor. Some of our people are starting to question the old ways. Vera's golden eyes held a mixture of hope and fear. We've received 17 requests for sanctuary in the past 2 days. Warriors, civilians, even a few low-level clan leaders. All of them asking the same question, is there really another way to live? Naia felt something cold settle in her stomach. We're not just refugees anymore. No. We're the beginning of something new. A challenge to everything the clans have built their power on. Vera smiled, but it was edged with worry. Some of these people have abandoned their posts, their families, their entire lives because they heard about a human soldier who stayed behind to save strangers. Because they learned that compassion doesn't make you weak, it makes you dangerous to those who profit from hatred. Dangerous enough to start a war? Maybe. Or dangerous enough to end one. Vera stood, brushing sand from her robes. The old councils fear ideas more than weapons, sister. Because weapons can be broken, but ideas. She gestured toward the mixed group of humans and aliens working together to expand the camp's facilities. Ideas carry themselves. Naia looked out at the growing community. Former enemies sharing food, alien children learning human songs, warriors from opposing sides standing guard together. It was messy, imperfect, fragile as desert glass, but it was real. What have we done? She whispered. What someone had to do, Vera replied. The question now is whether we're strong enough to carry what comes next. That night, as the camp settled into its evening routines, Naia found herself thinking about weight again. Not the physical burden of dragging Kai across the wasteland, but the invisible load they had all taken on, the responsibility of proving that another way was possible, the danger of becoming symbols in a conflict they had never chosen to fight. But for the first time since dropping her blade in the station, Naia felt ready for that weight. Because she wasn't carrying it alone. The twin sons of Vaeleth were setting as the medical transport lifted off, carrying Kai toward proper treatment and recovery. Naia watched it disappear into the orange sky, then turned to help with the evening meal preparation. There were children to feed, families to shelter, and tomorrow there would be another transport of refugees to integrate into their growing community. No orders now. No ancient clan obligations or military hierarchies. Just the people they chose to carry, and the weight of building something better from the ashes of what they'd lost. As Naia made her rounds through the camp that evening, checking on families and coordinating the next day's supply runs, she noticed something that made her pause. A young alien child, no more than 7 years old, was sitting by one of the cooking fires, wearing something that caught the light strangely. It was one of her old clan markings, a small metal disc that had once been sewn into her armor, bearing the intricate spirals that marked her as a huntress of the Thera bloodline. The child must have found it among the supplies they'd salvaged from various crash sites and now wore it proudly on a cord around his neck. "Hey," Naia called gently, crouching down to the child's level. "What's your name?" "Jorik," the boy replied in the careful common tongue that the camp's children were learning. His parents had been killed in the early days of the war, and he'd somehow survived on his own before the refugee convoy found him. "Are you the one who carries people?" The question caught Naia off guard. "What do you mean?" "The grown-ups say you carried the human warrior across the burning lands. That you chose to save instead of hurt." Jorik's large golden eyes, so like her own, held a gravity that seemed too old for his small face. "They say you're teaching us a new way to be strong." Naia felt her throat tighten. "I'm still learning that way myself." The child reached into a small pouch at his waist and pulled out something that made Naia's breath catch. It was a piece of stone, no bigger than her palm, carved with extraordinary skill into the shape of two figures walking side by side. One was clearly meant to be human, the other alien, and both were supporting each other as they moved forward. "I made this for you," Jorik said, pressing the carving into her hands. "My father taught me to work stone before the fighting came. He said art should show truth." Naia turned the carving over in her hands, marveling at the detail work. Despite his youth, the child had captured something essential about the journey she and Kai had shared, not just the physical act of carrying, but the way they had supported each other through impossible circumstances. "Why?" she asked. "Why make this for me?" Jorik pointed to the clan marking hanging around his neck. "Because you carry light now, even if the blade fell." He smiled, the expression transforming his serious face into something bright and hopeful. "My father used to say that the strongest warriors aren't the ones who never drop their weapons. They're the ones who pick up something better." Naia closed her fingers around the carved stone, feeling its warmth and weight. Another burden to carry, but this one felt different, not heavy with obligation or tradition, but warm with possibility. "Thank you, Jorik," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll treasure this." "Will you teach me?" the child asked. "How to carry people instead of weapons." Naia looked around the camp, at humans and aliens working together, at former enemies sharing meals and stories, at the fragile hope they were all building one day at a time. "We'll learn together," she said. "All of us." Later that evening, as Naia walked through the camp checking on families and coordinating supply distributions, she passed between two temporary shelters and caught fragments of a heated conversation in her native tongue. "Betrayed everything we stand for," one voice was saying, sharp with anger. "She cast aside honor, tradition, the blood bonds that made us strong. She is no daughter of the clans." "You're wrong." The second voice was quieter but no less firm. "She didn't betray her people. She changed us all." "Changed us into what?" "Weak-hearted fools who weep over enemy dead?" "Into something better than what we were." A pause then. "My son asked me yesterday why we used to kill the humans instead of helping them. I had no answer that didn't make me ashamed. The old ways kept us alive for generations. The old ways were killing us slowly, one act of vengeance at a time. She showed us that carrying someone doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong enough to carry a future worth living in." Pretty words. But when the hunter packs come, will your philosophy stop their blades? Maybe not. But maybe it will stop the next generation from needing to send them. The voices faded as the speakers moved away, leaving Naia alone with the weight of understanding. She wasn't just a person anymore. She had become an idea, a symbol of possibility that some embraced and others feared. The thought terrified and humbled her in equal measure. But in the dust behind her, barely visible in the fading light, were the tracks of someone else walking, slower, more careful, but determined to keep pace. Kai Voss had learned to carry people. Now Naia Thera was learning the same lesson, one step at a time. And in the space between them, measured in footprints in alien sand, was the beginning of something that might one day be called peace. She walked ahead, but the dust rose behind her because he was still walking. And in that trail of disturbed sand that glowed in the alien twilight, there walked not just a human learning to heal, not just an alien learning to forgive, but something larger and more dangerous to the old order, a choice made once in desperation, now carried forward in hope. A choice that whispered to anyone who saw their footprints side by side that the weight of tradition was nothing compared to the weight of tomorrow, and that sometimes changing the world begins with refusing to leave someone behind.